in tandem. Taste and aroma equal the flavor that you perceive. Now, there's a famous French food writer who lived in the 1800s, a guy named Brillat-Savarin, and he explained it this way. He said that your mouth is like a laboratory, and that laboratory has the ability to perceive the basic tastes. Coming off that laboratory is a chimney, which is your sniffer. And your nose has the ability to perceive all things aromatic, and those two things in tandem with one another give you the ability to perceive and enjoy flavor. One of the great things about recognizing the distinction between taste and flavor is that when you're in the kitchen seasoning food, most of your challenges will have to do with the interaction of tastes with one another. Not so much about esoteric herbs and spices, but it just boils down to sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and savory. This next little exercise that we're going to walk through will help you understand that interaction really, really well. As we do this, take small bites. You don't need to eat a lot of any of this food. I want to revisit much of this food again and again, so small bites are the order of the day. Let's begin with a quick bite of melon. Now, obviously melon is sweet. There's a wonderful floral aroma that tells me something about this melon, that it is ripe. That floral quality, that muskiness is really an indicator of ripeness, as is the level of sugar, as is its texture, and the juiciness. You know, it's heavy and moist with juice. I said earlier that sweetness is a marker for ripeness, which I believe, but I think it's very, very subtle. I don't think, for instance, you could convince yourself that this is a riper melon simply by putting sugar on it, but let's try it. Take this melon and dip it into sugar and then taste it again. That excess sugar may fool you for just a second, but when you start to recognize that the texture and the aroma aren't equal to that level of sugar, then you recognize that something is amiss. Now, as we're eating melon here, I would ask, how many of you are melon salters? I'm a melon salter myself. My grandmother before me was a melon salter. Usually about a third of the people out there love to salt melon. So if you take and put a little bit of salt on melon, not a lot, just enough to give it a little seasoning. It might surprise you that you have a much fuller taste experience. It's more satisfying for just a few grains of salt, and it might even surprise you that it's actually tasting a little sweeter. It lingers longer on your palate. For some reason, it seems more enjoyable. Imagine now that you are traveling to Mexico on vacation, and in the morning, there is melon laid out for breakfast, and side by each with the melon is lime juice. What would happen if we seasoned this melon with a few drops of lime juice? So, doesn't take very much. Again, a fuller experience. The sweetness of the melon is tempered by the acidity of this lime juice. But more than that, the lime is actually a ripe fruit. There's a tremendous aroma to lime that is the result of this fruit having ripened. And that aroma mingles with the muskiness of this melon, and it seems somehow riper for having a fuller aroma. Let's put the melon down for just a second. Just leave that alone. And I'm going to do something mean. I'm going to ask you to taste Radicchio all on its own. Now remember what I said earlier. The bitter flavor is almost like a warning device to tell us that we're eating something that's risky. And if we swallow it, it may do us some harm because there's a chance that it will be poisonous. It's surprising that you taste bitterness most acutely at the very back of your palate, almost as if Mother Nature is saying, one last chance to notice that this food is bitter, and then if you swallow it, it's your fault that you poisoned yourself. Here's what we're going to do. Take a little piece of this radicchio and just chew it up. Our ability to perceive bitterness is very, very acute. Right now, my palate is sort of overwhelmed by bitterness. And as I said, I taste it most acutely at the back of my tongue. It's not particularly pleasant. And if I were to ask you what a good strategy for dealing with bitterness in food might be, you might say, well, I like bitter coffee with sugar in it, so let's see what happens if we put a little bit of sugar on this radicchio. Initially, I noticed the sweetness. But side by side with that sweetness, the bitterness actually seems more intense. So initially sweet, 2 thumbs up, and then as that sweetness passes off of my palate, the bitterness is back, and compared to the sweetness, it's more aggressive than ever it was. In coffee, I think it works. When you have a foodstuff that has an inherent sweetness already, then sweetness is maybe a good strategy, but there's no sweetness in this radicchio. So let's move from sugar to salt. Let's instead put a little bit of salt on this radicchio. And now suddenly, there's a resonance. The bitterness is still there, but there's something about seasoning it with salt that makes the flavor fuller and less aggressive. I think we're on the right track. At least I hope that we are. Next, I would like you to take a drop or 2 of lime and put that on this radicchio, and we'll taste it with just acidity. One way to understand that would be, here's a salad dressing in the form of lime juice that I put on this bitter green, and if you're like me, it actually tastes pretty good. The acidity is assertive enough to stand up to the bitterness and push it down a little bit. It's as if when you eat the radicchio all on its own, it's the star. And now, side by side with acidity, it becomes sort of one of the supporting players in a flavor experience. What I want to do is kind of tie this all together. We learned a little bit about flavor interaction, but I want you to imagine for a second that you and I are going to open a restaurant, and on that restaurant's menu will be a salad that has bitter greens and melon. The dressing will be made with lime juice, and we'll take everything that we've learned about seasoning and bring it to bear on this dish. So what I'm going to suggest is a small little bite of melon, a piece of radicchio. I want you to dress it with lime juice, and I'm thinking, 4 or 5 drops, something like that. Season it with salt. The flavors are big, so the salt has to be assertive. And then let's see if we can punch up some of the sweetness of that melon with sugar. I suggested that maybe you get a little bit of cayenne. And I like things spicy. I've lived in California for more than 30 years. If you want to take just a few grains of cayenne and put that on your melon salad, I think that's entirely appropriate. Don't overdo it because we don't want to blow your palate away. So gather this all up and in one mouthful, chew it up and close your eyes and evaluate the flavor experience. Here we go. The first thing I would have you notice is that the experience is very, very full. There's a lot going on there. I have the bitter greens, I have the sweetness of the melon, I have the aroma of the melon and the lime, the sweetness, the saltiness, that little bit of heat or irritation that comes from cayenne. So it's a full experience, and that's not surprising because what we've done is we have jangled all of our taste receptors. Those for sweet, sour, salty, bitter have all been brought to life because of what we just ate. But beyond just a full experience, if you're like me, I think you've got another realization, and that is that if you had it to do again, you now know that you could change these things almost infinitely and come up with a flavor experience that suits your taste. This idea of tasting, evaluating, and then adjusting is incredibly important. And that skill is one that you will do in the kitchen again and again and again. So as I tasted through here, I thought, oof, I wish I'd put just a couple more drops of lime on there. And to accompany that lime, a couple of more grains of salt would really punch up the flavor in a nice way. I hit it on the sugar. The cayenne was just right. Those subtleties to the interaction of taste and flavor are incredibly important for what we're going to be doing going forward in the kitchen. Don't waste any time wishing you were a better taster. Put your effort into becoming a better taster through focused attention and curiosity every time you prepare, season, and eat food. This skill set is really foundational. It'll serve you well every day of your life, and the payoff is more enjoyment and pleasure every time you sit down to eat.